Tuesday, it's their last practice before the bye, and Woody Johnson flies his helicopter in, lands it there. All the players kind of looked around like, well, this can't be good. And Joe Douglas turned to Jeff Ulbrich, and there were several other coaches there. And, I heard this from several people said, well, if I get pulled off the practice field here, it's been an honor serving with you. And they laughed about it, and he was pulled off the practice field, and he was gone before those guys got off of practice. And that was it, gone.
Welcome to the NFL on Fox podcast, presented by Verizon, the NFL powered by Verizon 5G. I am your host, Dave Helman. We've got a fun show for y'all on this Tuesday. Going to look at some Thanksgiving affirmations, talk about what we're thankful for in the NFL this season, really get into the spirit of Thanksgiving already sneaking up on us on Thursday. Looking forward to that. Going to talk to my guy, Jay Glazer, later on in the show, get the latest on the Daniel Jones situation. Very curious to see where he winds up after being released by the New York Giants. Not just the Giants we're going to talk about. We'll get into all of the latest with the New York Jets as well. Always something happening there for better or for worse. Fun conversation with Jay Glazer coming up later in the show. And of course, we'll have our power rankings. But first, we did wrap up week 12 on Monday night with an entertaining game out here in LA. And to help me break it all down, the top of the show, I'm joined, as I often am, by Fox Sports reporter Carmen Vitale. Carm, how we doing?
Great. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you so much, and to you and yours as well. Let's jump into it. Okay. Monday Night Football. It was the Harbaugh Bowl, the Harb Bowl. I prefer Harb Bowl.
I like Harb Bowl too.
I think it's more fun.
Yeah, like Harbaugh Bowl. It's too much. Harb Bowl.
The Baltimore Ravens come out west and they get a 30-23 win against the LA Chargers. John Harbaugh improves to 3-0 against his little brother, Jim.
Yeah.
I know they
really
love each
satisfying.
other. They say all the right things, but it feels good to put your little brother back in his place.
I loved what Jim said at the beginning of the game too, where he was like, I would lay down my life for my brother. I will not let him win a football game. And turns out he did. As an older sibling, I fully support John Harbaugh in this. Like, any chance you get to put your younger sibling and continue putting your younger sibling in their place is like the best. Like, I can no longer do it because my brother's 6'1" and like he's so much bigger and taller than me. So like I used to be able to like wrestle him to the ground. I can't do that anymore. But if you can still beat your younger sibling, by all means.
As a younger sibling, I was kind of holding out hope for the Chargers.
Yeah, it tracks.
Midway through the third quarter, this thing felt like it was going to go the Ravens' way. And that's what I want to talk about off the top here, is just that I felt like this was not a muscle flexing performance by the Baltimore Ravens. Like, of course, they get the win. They score 30 points. They went on the road against the team that's currently in the playoff field. It's a nice win. But in the fourth quarter, I was like, man, are the Ravens even playing that well? And then I looked at the box score and I was like, well, yeah, Derrick Henry is on pace for 140 yards. Lamar Jackson has been borderline perfect, 126.5 passer rating, 2 touchdowns, rushed for a touchdown, his third rushing touchdown.
We also had 5 total fourth down attempts. All 5 of them converted across both teams. So like there was also that. I feel like, especially in the beginning, in the first half, there were efforts to kind of establish like, no, this is my game. No, this is my game. And between the two brothers.
I think it just speaks to how high the standard is for the Ravens and how good I think that they can be. I mean, nice performance, but it didn't register for me in terms of like a jaw-dropping Ravens performance, because that's how highly I think.
Yeah, we know they're capable of so much more.
Yes. Which is terrifying because the numbers will tell you they played great.
They did. Derrick Henry averaged 5.8 yards a carry. That was you said this while we were watching the game, but it really was the quietest 140-yard game.
He had a long of 27, but the rest of this game was just 5 yards, 6 yards, 4 yards, just grinding the Chargers down. And this was the number 1 run defense in the NFL for a lot of the year. And it just goes to show there aren't very many defenses that can deal with this Ravens rushing attack. There just aren't.
This is the second game in a row now that the Chargers have given up 21 or more points. It's the only time they've done that this season. This was a season high for the Chargers defense, giving up 30 points to the Baltimore Ravens. So to your point too, the Ravens did what most teams in the league have not been able to do, which is score on the Chargers defense. And it just kind of seemed like business as usual.
And it's interesting. Chargers come out on the losing side of this. Last week, they dabbled with blowing it against Cincinnati, but they held on for the win. And they lose here. I'm not going to say they lose in convincing fashion. I thought they acquitted themselves really well. They need another piece on offense. We'll get to that in a minute.
I was going to say.
We'll get to that in a minute. But in general, I came into this back-to-back AFC North swing. Chargers played the Bengals and the Ravens back-to-back. And even though they lost this game, like I said, not convincingly, but it was obvious the Ravens were going to win for most of the fourth quarter. I feel better about the Chargers than I did 2 weeks ago because they've gone up against like MVP caliber quarterback competition.
Tough.
The best of the best offenses, even the Bengals don't have a winning record, but they've got a top 5 offense over there, and they handled themselves well. Like, I think of the Chargers as a more legit team than I did 2 weeks ago, even with this loss now on the
I mean, I think it's validation too for what we thought the Chargers could be and like how sustainable this success is. I think there was still a element of holding your breath on the Chargers for a little bit to see, all right, Jim Harbaugh's coming in. Culture changer, all that kind of stuff. Does that manifest right away? And then you see this defense just, not allowing anything. So stingy, so good, so aggressive. And you saw the run first kind of offense that we expected to see in the beginning. But now you're starting to see it blossom. And I think that's the difference over the last month of the season where you're seeing Justin Herbert be able to open it up a little bit more and more guys get involved. Ladd McConkey coming on, all that kind of stuff. And you're like, okay, is this sustainable? Was the foundation set for the Los Angeles Chargers that they can now build upon? And yes, when they play these really tough kind of traditional old school rock'em sock'em teams of the AFC North and go toe to toe with these guys for most of it, that gives you kind of that validation that you need. Like, yeah, the Chargers are for real.
I agree. But you say the word sustainable, and here's 2 problems as I see them. Number 1, J.K. Dobbins left this game fairly early.
Yeah, that's true.
And did not return. So
that's not.
We hope for the best there because that could change this offense because there's nothing sustainable in this Chargers passing game other than Justin Herbert being one of the most talented throwers of the football in the world. And thank God for Ladd McConkey.
Thank God for Ladd McConkey. 6 catches on 6 targets because he was the only one that decided he wanted to catch Justin Herbert's passes tonight.
I'll throw a tip of the cap at Will Dissly for having a nice season. But Joshua Palmer, 3 catches on 8 targets. Jalen Reagor, 2 on 4 with a bad drop. And then, of course, there's Quentin Johnston, the number 1 overall pick from the first round pick.
Yeah, first round
pick
from
last year, who looked like he was turning a corner for a solid chunk of this season.
Not quite.
Prime time.
No catches.
Standalone game. No catches on 5 targets. A couple of mind-numbing drops. You could tell they were even
back to back too.
You could by the end of this game, you could tell he was in his head about struggling.
For sure.
You could just tell that the enormity of his miscues were just eating him alive. I don't know what to do there. Except I come away from it thinking like, sure, you can beat so-so teams. You can beat so-so offenses with this group of skill players, but against the Baltimores of the world, you got another game against the Kansas City Chiefs coming up. The Chargers have to play the Falcons and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Like in a game where your offense or your defense can't hold the opponent below 21, I worry about who's coming through for Justin Herbert because this was a picture-perfect example of this guy needs more help.
Yeah, and I think when I say I think the Chargers kind of shift is sustainable, I mean in the long term. I don't know that I necessarily trust them anymore to make a run in the postseason at all this year.
Yes. Oh, if we're talking big picture.
Yeah, like I'm talking more big picture here where I'm like, all right, this whole Jim Harbaugh thing obviously is working.
big picture, I'm buying up all the Charger stock that I can because they're going to have cap space.
Yep.
They can fix some of the issues that are bothering them right now quickly.
Yeah.
Here in 2024, I like this team. I think they're fun.
But they're playing with house money as it
They
is.
are. No,
like
hey.
no one really had a lot of expectations as far as postseason for.
If you told
Los
anybody
Angeles
in
Chargers.
August the Chargers are going to be a wild card and lose their wild card game to whoever, the
Yeah.
Ravens, the
I'd be
Buffalo
like, yeah.
Bills, you're saying sign me up for that
Yep.
all day because I thought this was a reset year for the Chargers, and it is.
Right.
That's the crazy thing. They're just playing so much better and so far ahead of schedule than a lot of people gave them credit for. That said, it's all about the Ravens here. Like I said, to go on the road and play, I don't even want to say ho-hum because like they played well, but
Right.
to not even play like one of their 3 best games this season and get a comfortable win against a playoff contender, it just speaks to how high the ceiling is for the Ravens.
Yeah.
Just love to see it a little more consistently.
That's my big thing where you talk about, do you trust the Baltimore Ravens here? And it's like, yes, for all of the metrics, all of the talent, all of the coaching on this team would lead me to say, yeah, of course I trust the Baltimore Ravens. But then they just have these like mind-numbing hiccups. And like, you never know when those are going to come because they show up in big ways for big games. And then they drop ones where you're just like,
nobody
what?
shows up better for a primetime game
Than the Baltimore
than
Ravens,
the Lamar
yes.
Jackson Baltimore Ravens.
But on at 1 p.m. on a Sunday, I don't know. Do I trust the Baltimore Ravens? That's a great question. I'm not totally sure.
They got the Eagles coming up they got the Eagles coming up next week. I trust them there in a late afternoon spot. I trust them in a revenge game against the Steelers.
Are they
against the Browns?
Are they this year's Buffalo Bills of like last year, maybe 2 years ago, where like they played up and down to their competition?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
I think we talked about it after one of the Ravens' mind-numbing results this year where, the old joke was about Kirk Cousins. Like, I trust him at noon. I don't trust him in primetime. That's what people said for years.
Yeah.
I trust the Baltimore Ravens implicitly in primetime.
In primetime game.
If they're playing at noon, I'm a little nervous. I get a little scared.
They play up and down to their competition.
But having said all of that, you can't fault them here. A nice win for them to get to 8-4, still back of the Steelers in the AFC North, but looking like they're going to be just fine.
Mark Andrews got a touchdown. I think any game where Mark Andrews gets a touchdown, I feel like that's when I know that I can trust the Baltimore.
Justice Hill is like the perfect change of pace guy. Like it's like, it's the old Thunder and Lightning.
He had 55 total yards on 4 carries, right?
Yeah,
but like his long was 51. So it was like he got 1 yard on every other.
Put your speed back in there after everybody's tired of tackling Derrick Henry. I get it.
Yeah,
I wanted to shout this out. One last thing, and then we'll move on. Derrick Henry recorded his 20th career game with 140 rushing yards. Okay, that in itself is impressive enough, but the list of guys that he joined,
longer than you think.
It's 7 other dudes.
Yeah, which is, I think, longer than you'd think.
It's like the 7 best running backs in the history of the game. Like the dudes who have done it: Barry Sanders, Eric Dickerson, Adrian Peterson, Walter Payton, Emmitt Smith, LaDainian Tomlinson, Jim Brown, Derrick Henry. So he didn't have the crazy night that Saquon had, and he now officially trails Saquon in the rushing tally for the year. But
that's like
the guy is just unbelievable. And I think I said this earlier in the season. 6 months ago, I wasn't 100% convinced that Derrick Henry was a Hall of Famer. Maybe that's on me.
Yeah.
And now I'm just like, how did I ever doubt that?
It's interesting though, because when you kind of, you see all these crazy things that Derrick Henry is doing, right? And you're like, oh my God, he's on pace for this many. He could break the rushing record, yada, yada, yada. But like, he's had a 2,000 yard season before.
Yes.
And that didn't break it. Like the rushing performances of like Adrian Peterson and LaDainian Tomlinson were so absolutely unfathomably insane that like this iteration of the NFL doesn't really foster that, I feel like, as much. And so even though Derrick Henry is doing so much more than his peers, or conceivably so much more than his peers, or him and Saquon are, they like don't really match up like you think they would on an all-time list, which is why I like that stat a lot, because then you actually do get to see he is stacking up with the greats of the greats.
Starting to put together like a historical.
Yeah. It still is crazy to me though that
put together a historical type of resume.
That is as long of a list as it is.
It used to be a running back league, man.
Yeah,
and
it's true.
Bringing it.
We're bringing it back. We're going to get into that too, I think.
We absolutely are. It is a perfect segue. Because that's what we're going to do. I teased it. We're going to talk about what we're thankful for in this NFL season. And hint, a big part of that conversation is the running back position. Hopefully, this is finding you at a time. This always an exciting week. A lot to be thankful for in real life. But Carmen, the segment here today is we're gonna take it to a football place. We're gonna talk about things we're thankful for in the NFL this season. Not a whole lot of like rules and regulations to this segment. Going to start very macro. I think there's some really interesting places we can go and take it closer, more minute as we go. Yeah,
just and micro
stuff we're thankful for in the NFL, stuff that makes us happy this season as we get ready for a Thursday with not only turkey and loved ones and all that good stuff, but 3 NFL football games.
Really fun football games.
At least 2 really quality football games and another one that's also happening. Anyway, let's get into it. Let's talk about what we're thankful for. And I'm going to give you the floor for your first one, which I think is really exciting.
It is. I am thankful for second chances, and in some cases, third and fourth. And I think that there are a few other quarterbacks in the league right now that probably agree with me, insofar as Jared Goff, Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, Geno Smith, all of these guys at one point or another were given up on in their careers by their teams, floated around a couple different places, but they are now lighting the league on fire across divisions. Especially when you consider that Jared Goff and Sam Darnold are in the same division and are now dueling and will be dueling. We'll get to that a little bit later as the season kind of concludes. But I'm so happy for a guy like Jared Goff, who had some initial success with the Rams, but it just wasn't a good fit. And then gets essentially... he's a consolation prize to go to Detroit in the trade for Matthew Stafford.
Felt like a salary dump when it happened.
It was.
Feels like a different lifetime ago.
I know.
But when that trade happened, it was like, oh, you've got to throw in Jared Goff to like get him off the books. It is what it is.
Get him off the books. The Lions needed a quarterback, like all that kind of stuff. The
Lions are like, okay, fine.
We'll take Jared Goff.
We'll carry this cap hit for a couple of years until we figure out what we want to do. That's what people were saying as recently as like before the 2022 season, by the way. And
not to mention, Dan Campbell gets there. You go through a 3-win season if you're Jared Goff and you're like, oh man, what did I really get myself into? But in all of this, this whole situation, then there was this singular belief in the team and there was support for him. Very early on, Dan Campbell was supportive of Jared Goff, like, while things were still not going great. And then you get a coordinator like Ben Johnson, who is the hottest head coaching candidate going into next season. And he has made some magic happen with Jared Goff to the point where the Lions look completely unstoppable. They can score 30 points in their sleep. All of these guys that I'm talking about here are in the top 10 as far as quarterback rating in yardage totals. These are some extraordinarily productive quarterbacks that were at one point left for dead. So there's Jared Goff. Baker Mayfield is such a wonderful example of that too, given that he was on multiple teams before he ended up at the Bucs. So much so that the Bucs then, this is the other part of this. They actually he was a backup plan if they weren't able to land Tom Brady.
All the way back in 2020.
All the way back in 2020. If they couldn't land Tom Brady, they've liked Baker that long. And then it finally aligns that they get Baker. And not only do they make him feel supported, but when it comes time for Dave Canales to leave and take the head coaching job with the Carolina Panthers, Baker was involved, despite not being under contract. for the long term. Baker was involved in bringing Liam Cohen to Tampa Bay, and that has gone so beautifully for them this year. It's made Baker feel supported. He's having the best year of his career, and he's having so much fun. We saw him with the Tommy DeVito celebration, which he did a little too aggressively. If my Italian heart's being a little honest, come on, Baker.
It's like gesturing I love a little you so too much,
but gesturing wildly in the end zone. But he's clearly having so much fun, and I'm so thankful. I'm sure he's very thankful to the Bucs organization for sticking with him and for helping him flourish. Sam Darnold goes without saying. Geno Smith, same thing. Geno Smith's stats are out like through the roof this year as far as passing stats go. Sam Darnold, again, having a coach like Kevin O'Connell who really takes the time to develop you.
Sam Darnold is the one for me, I think. And like no disrespect to all those other guys, but like, Baker had an amazing season in Cleveland. He got the Browns to the playoffs. You could argue the Browns had no business being so eager to move on from Baker, considering
I don't think there is an argument there, and I think a lot of Cleveland fans would agree with you.
He played through an injury his last year in Cleveland and still had not a great season, but was still productive. Geno had to wait almost 10 years for his second opportunity, grew into a completely different person and player. Jared Goff got to a Super Bowl with the Rams. I'm not trying to throw shade on Sam Darnold, but it does feel like the ultimate example of, with the exception of like a 2 or 3 game stretch in Carolina for that 1 year, Sam Darnold really hadn't enjoyed success of any kind at any stop in the NFL. And he lands in Minnesota with a great play caller, a guy who hypes his people up. I mean, how about Kevin O'Connell hyping up other teams' quarterbacks, by the way, too?
Yeah, what he said to Caleb Williams.
Caleb Williams. I think he did it to another quarterback earlier this season as well.
I think he did it to CJ Stroud.
Yeah, CJ. And then obviously the weapons in Minnesota. And you see what's going on to the point where, whether it's in Minnesota or somewhere else, Sam Darnold's going to be the guy that gets the Baker or Geno deal next year, because he's only on that 1 year, $10 million deal. He's played well enough. I'd be shocked if somebody's not willing to give him a shot to be a franchise guy, even if it's not Minnesota because of JJ McCarthy.
He's got 101.7 quarterback rating through these first 12 weeks of the season, and that ranks 9th in the league overall. I'm very, very happy for him. I don't like saying him last had nothing to do with how happy I am. It's just, I think it's a huge testament to Kevin O'Connell and how well he can develop quarterbacks and how much those situations really do matter. We're seeing that more than ever.
Can I throw this out there?
Okay.
We're basically on like a 3 or 4 year run of having a guy like this every year. It was Goff in 22. Baker and Geno did it together in 23. Darnold's doing it right now. So
who's the next one?
Who's the reclamation project for 2025? And is it potentially the guy who just got fired by the New York Giants? That's just what comes to my mind right now.
I don't know if you would throw Bryce Young into something
I was gonna say Bryce Young until he just started. He didn't even need to change teams to get a second chance.
That's true.
He took it and ran with it, and he looks amazing. I don't know if Daniel Jones would get a chance to start right away in 2025, but I've got a circle drawn around Daniel Jones.
I like that a lot, because there's absolutely a Sam Darnold pathway here for Daniel Jones.
If we've learned anything, it's not to write these guys off too soon. And second chances. I like it, Carm.
Yeah.
Which actually, the first thing I'm thankful for goes hand in hand with that. I'll stick with the giving thanks sort of language and say I'm thankful for new beginnings.
Oh.
Because it feels like the quarterback situation in the NFL is in a new beginning, and it is in an incredibly good spot. I think every time there's a benching, it happened to Bryce Young earlier this season. It happened to Anthony Richardson, where the whole world comes down on these guys and everybody says, oh, we throw these guys into the fire too quickly. We give up on them too quickly. There's an argument to be made for that. And the way that guys get thrown into the mix as quickly as they do, I think you're always going to have that conversation. But watching Caleb Williams ball against the Vikings the other day and watching Bryce Young
take the Chiefs down to the wire.
I mean, the game of his career, looking like the Heisman Trophy winner, watching Bo Nix emerge as all of a sudden a possible Rookie of the Year candidate for the Broncos. We know what Jaden Daniels has done this year. I know he's having a bit of a sophomore slump, but I promise you, watch the games. CJ Stroud is just fine.
Yeah.
I just listed off half of the starting quarterback, like half a dozen starting quarterbacks in the NFL. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Because I went back and looked at this. I think the quarterback situation in the NFL has been in transition, and rightfully so.
Mm-hmm.
Since 2019, we have lost so many franchise, face of the franchise type of guys, from Andrew Luck to Eli Manning, Phillip Rivers, Drew Brees, Big Ben Roethlisberger, and obviously Tom Brady.
Right.
All of that production, all of that star power, all of that weekly all-pro caliber quarterback play, it didn't vanish overnight, but it all went away really quickly.
Yeah.
We lost a lot of, 50 Pro Bowl selections, 11 All-Pros, 4 NFL Offensive Player of the Year. Brady won MVP 3 times. The names I just listed off made 16 Super Bowl appearances during the course of their careers. 12 Super Bowl championships, obviously. Most of those are Tom. But you're still talking about 12 Super Bowl championships between those quarterbacks I just listed off. We've just needed time to replace that type of production. And I'm here to tell you that we're doing it.
Yeah.
Maybe we even have done it. Because I went back and looked at this. I just listed off the rookies. We know the rookies are playing well. We know CJ Stroud had an incredible rookie year as well. 11 of the starting quarterbacks in the NFL right now are 26 or younger.
It's wild.
And that's guys who have a long-term future. I'm not just even talking about the rookies, but Jalen Hurts is only 26 years old. Somehow Tua Tagovailoa is only 26 years old. Justin Herbert is only 26 years old.
And then you consider Patrick Mahomes is what, only 27?
Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen are 28. Sam Darnold, whatever the future holds for him, he'll only be 28 next year. Lamar Jackson, Carm, is 27.
Yeah.
Who did I forget? Trevor Lawrence. I know. Maybe
he's another one of those that could have.
Oh, you better
go
believe.
somewhere else.
Sell me all the Trevor Lawrence stock. I'm fine buying it up. He's only 25. Brock Purdy, somehow only 24. Jordan Love, 26.
Yeah.
The bulk of this league is right in that fun window where you're getting ready to enter your prime. And that's terrifying when you think about the guys like Mahomes and Josh Allen and Lamar, what they've accomplished. They still have several years until they turn 30 years old. On top of that, there's only 8 guys starting in the league right now that are north of 30. We'll see what happens with Aaron Rodgers. Obviously, his career winding down one way or the other. Kirk Cousins, Matthew Stafford, Geno Smith. But 2 of the 8 are Jared Goff
and Dak Prescott.
Jared Goff and Dak Prescott.
Yeah, who are right at 30, 31.
And just signed mega extensions.
Right.
They're going to be in place where they are for the foreseeable future. The quarterback position in the NFL is in such an exciting spot, and so many of these guys are playing good football. Is it going to be linear? Is it just always going to go up? Of course not. But
no.
There are so many superstar quarterbacks, and it's been so fun. A big part of that, these young guys, for the most part, have been hits. Caleb Williams is a hit. I'm comfortable saying that right now.
Thank you for saying that,
Jaden,
too.
Bo Nix,
we haven't even
Stroud.
talked about J.J. McCarthy either, what he could possibly do once he gets into a lineup. He's 21. He's 21.
I'm so excited about where things are going and where they will continue to go. It felt like we grew up in the same era. It felt like Tom and Peyton Manning and Drew Brees were going to do this forever.
And they did do it.
And they did. And I'm here to tell you, I just listed off of all the names I just listed, half or more of those guys are going to be starting in the NFL well into their 30s. And we will, as crazy as it sounds, if you grew up in that era, we will be mythologizing these guys and talking about them the same way we talked about all those other Hall of Famers.
I love this conversation too, because I think it directly speaks to this growing sentiment that I've seen on social media of quarterback play and offense in general is down. And people don't have this attention span anymore for anything but flashy plays and whatever you attribute that to, it's just blatantly untrue. I think a lot of it though is what you're saying is that our generation was so used to seeing guys in their prime. And when you talk about quarterbacks in their prime, that's 30 and above. Like, you really don't enter your prime until you're about 30. If you really are that elite quarterback, like, you look at what guys like Tom Brady, Drew Brees, Aaron Rodgers did prior to 30 and then after 30. You have multiple more MVPs. You're more sure of yourself. You know what you're getting with these guys, and you expect elite quarterback play because they deliver over and over again and have been delivering consistently. You're right. That's now out of the league. We are still seeing, for all of those quarterbacks you just mentioned, most of them, I would say, are still kind of on this up and down. All right, like CJ Stroud is the perfect example where he did beautifully in his first year. There's a little bit of quote unquote regression this year, which I don't even think is the case. I really do think that he's going to be fine. But we haven't had the benefit of consistency, if that makes sense, to see these guys over and over again deliver at this high level because they're still figuring things out because they are so young. Once, like, in 5 years, when all of these guys are like 30 and like in their early 30s and all that kind of, like, that is going to be an incredible time in the NFL. Like, it's going to rival any single generation of quarterback play, especially. I think it will be the best. And it's such a fun conversation to have. And I really do think it speaks to why maybe you're seeing, all right, there's a little bit more inconsistency, which speaks to there being more parity in the NFL right now. But that's not going to last long.
I mean, when you think about what we're getting right now, Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes put on a clinic every time they play. Lamar and Joe Burrow have given us must-see TV twice this season.
Baker Mayfield and Jared Goff going at it in the playoffs and then again in the regular season. Like, even guys like that are so much fun to watch. With all due
respect to the era I grew up in, and I love it, and it helped turn me into an NFL fanatic, I push back on nostalgia.
Right.
I'm tired of the nostalgia social media accounts that are just battering me with the idea that nothing will ever be cool again. And I'm here to tell you, we're in a great spot, and it's only going to get better.
Yeah, I agree football wise. It's one of those things where I think I still like the posts about Nickelodeon orange videotapes and Tamagotchis because I do think that was the best time. Anyway,
the past is a trap.
That is neither here nor there. We can't go back to it. But talk about quarterbacks and teams that are so incredibly exciting now and will be.
What else are you
brings
thankful
me
for?
To something else I'm really thankful for. And that is the NFC North, specifically their very backloaded schedule where the men and the boys will be separated going for the last 6-7 weeks we have left of this regular season. Do you know, Dave, we have had just 5 games between NFC North teams so far. Not only that, all but one of them have been decided by 3 points or less. They are phenomenal displays of football. And now, starting this week, we will never have to be without an NFC North game for the rest of the season because we have 7 in the next 6 weeks.
7 in the next 6 weeks?
7 in the next 6 weeks. I think we have 6 weeks left in the season.
Yeah, there's 6 more weeks.
Yeah. So yes, there's 7 games left in this division, starting with Chicago and Detroit on Thanksgiving in Detroit. Wonderful time. I love going to Thanksgiving football in Detroit. It's one of those very quintessential, talk about nostalgic, but it's one of those things where it's such a tradition. You've got the turkey legs. It's the John Madden celebration, all that kind of stuff. Now, this is going to be the Bears are on an upswing without actually winning. Detroit is clearly the better team, but the Bears are the weirder one. And this is going to be real fun.
Didn't the Bears just did this? The Bears beat the Lions on Thanksgiving last year, did they not? Or they
almost?
It was almost. And then they beat them like 2 weeks later.
Yeah.
But yeah, they messed around and tried to lose to the Bears on Thanksgiving last year. I mean, if you're writing Thursday off as an easy Lions win,
no,
I gotta see that to believe it.
I mean, the only team it has been easy for in the NFC North right now is the Lions. They're the only ones that have a win over a division opponent that's by more than 3 points. And that was against the Green Bay Packers in the weird kind of weather game where Detroit, despite playing in a dome, ended up playing better than the Green Bay Packers.
I'm looking at it right now, like that. So the Lions just whipped the Packers' ass at Lambeau in the rain a few weeks ago, but the other games,
yes,
obviously,
you've got week 4, Minnesota, Green Bay, 31-29. Minnesota won. Week 7, Detroit 31-29. Again, the same score, Detroit over Minnesota. That was a toss-up. Both those games were complete coin tosses, like whoever won. And then you had Week 9, Detroit 24, Green Bay 14, that game. Week 11, this a couple weeks ago, the game I was just at, Bears-Packers. Packers only win by 1 point, 20-19.
Blocked field goal. And
then this last week, Minnesota, Chicago. Minnesota wins in overtime in the walk-off field goal, 30-27. So these have been extraordinarily close contests, regardless of if it's the Chicago Bears playing or not. And we get to see this now going forward throughout the rest of the season. And you saw the graphic before. This division is the best one in football. 3 of the 4 teams have records over 500. I've been saying this. 3 of these, there will be 3 teams from the NFC North in the playoffs this year.
Yeah, but which order will they be in? And that's the fun part.
That's the fun part. That is where this last stretch, these last 6 weeks of the season, it's really going to whittle things down because these teams have no choice but to start cannibalizing each other. And it's going to be so much fun to see who ends up kind of shaking out. I still fully expect the Lions to win this. I have them as my Super Bowl pick against the Kansas City Chiefs. But whether it's Minnesota or Green Bay in that second spot in the division, I couldn't tell you.
I want to give the schedule makers a big hug for this because it's risky to leave so many marquee games until the back end of the season. You never know what can happen with injuries. You might be stuck with a bunch of division games that's
the wild part too, is
aren't all that juicy, but
the Lions have sustained injuries. The Vikings have sustained catastrophic injuries. Like the Lions don't have Aiden Hutchinson, who still ranks in the top 10, by the way, in like every major pass rushing stat, despite not playing for outside of 2 games this season. And then you got a Sam Darnold led Minnesota Vikings. Like when you're making this schedule, you were expecting, yes, maybe like by this point, I think you were probably expecting JJ McCarthy to be in the lineup for the Minnesota Vikings because you got Sam Darnold as your bridge.
Yeah.
Right. You got Sam Darnold as your bridge. You were thinking, all right, bring him along. And then JJ will start sometime around midseason, just in time for all of these games. You get Caleb Williams now, who is fighting. He's gone through hell and back. And now in the tougher part of the schedule, he is having to do his most development. It's incredible across the board.
I agree with you that if I had to bet today before Thanksgiving, I'm thinking the Lions hold on and win this division. But man, can you imagine if it stays as tight as it is here, all within a game of each other? You get to week 18, Bears at Packers, Vikings at Lions on the same day, and we'll have to see how the league would flex that and who would play when. But you could have the division title on the line. You could have the bye on the line. You could have potentially maybe a playoff spot on the line. Maybe somebody's playing to stay in as a wild card.
Yeah.
It's going to be cinema. It's going to be, the NFC West is great in its own way too, because that whole division is insane and first could be last and vice versa. But this, like you said, this is the best division in the league. This is heavyweight football, and they are going to have to play each other so many times between now and January.
I can't wait.
I'm excited just thinking about it. And it starts on Thanksgiving. Bears, Lions. All right. I want to tell you one more thing I'm thankful for.
Love.
And I started it out. I was going to say that I'm thankful for the running back resurgence. And
this is another great conversation.
Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry bringing value back to the running back position and showing people what these guys can do. And they have, to be fair. But I dug into it, and I'm going to rephrase it and say that I'm thankful that the running back position has seized on good marketing. And I'll tell you why. Because, look, Saquon Barkley, just shy of 1,400 yards. Derrick Henry, even coming in to week 12, was north of 1,100 yards. Like, it potentially unprecedented stuff. 2 guys who have an outside shot at the rushing record. We don't see that every year. But I went back and looked. It's not quite as unprecedented as I thought it was, Carm. Like, you go back and look, 2022, Josh Jacobs and Derrick Henry both finished with north of 1,500 rushing yards. Jonathan Taylor had an 1,800-yard season in 2021, feels like a fever dream.
That
like
does feel like a
I
fever
know
dream.
it happened, but it
Right.
feels like it happened a lot longer ago
Yeah.
than 2021. Derrick Henry had a 2,000-yard rushing season in 2020. That was definitely a fever dream. I'm convinced 2020 never actually
happened,
took place.
just across the board.
You can
Although I guess I have a Super Bowl ring to prove that it
Yeah,
did.
well, you find a way to throw that into every show, I think. I appreciate
I
it.
do not.
The point being, plenty of running backs have had seasons like this.
Yeah.
And even recently, I mean, you can go back to like 2016 where, I mean, there are years where we have a chance for Saquon, Derrick Henry, and Josh Jacobs to all run for more than the rushing champ. I mean, even last year, Christian McCaffrey ran for 1,450. All three of these guys could top the rushing champ from last year. But even still, I think what makes this stand out to me is that we are finally seeing game-changing, season-changing running backs on elite teams.
Yeah.
And you're seeing what a
Almost
difference it can make.
exclusively too. Like the most elite offenses this season include
Yes.
a very significant split between running the football and passing the football. Like each of the really, when you think about the offenses that have the most production this year, because even though you're not going to see them pop up on necessarily top 10 lists, like Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, what they're doing for Detroit, like they're kind of cannibalizing each other's carries, but like Detroit has a huge running component to their offense, and it's why they're so productive.
Every great offense in the league this year has some sort of viable running threat. I mean, the Ravens and the Lions and the Eagles speak for themselves, but Aaron Jones is closing in on 1,000 yards. Josh Jacobs has been a difference maker for the Packers. The Pittsburgh Steelers are always going to run the ball. Josh Allen and James Cook, it's not as great as maybe I thought it would be, but even having a mobile quarterback brings that element into it. But I think it makes such a difference to have these guys doing what they're doing on highly visible Super Bowl contenders. Because I went back and looked too. I went back and looked at the records of some of these great rushing seasons in the recent past. I mean, Nick Chubb did some insane stuff on some mediocre Browns teams. And as good as he was, Derrick Henry had a lot of fantastic seasons on middling Tennessee teams. Dalvin Cook had a 1,500-yard year for an 8-9 Minnesota team. There's a difference between that
individual stats like that and
basically being the only thing that works on your team.
Yeah.
There's a difference between that and what Saquon is doing for Philadelphia or what Derrick Henry is helping Baltimore do. I'm stealing this from our friend Mina Kimes, but she said throwing a good running back onto a good offense, like a good offensive line, good ecosystem. It's like throwing gasoline onto a fire.
Yes.
Like any running back could be not doing what Saquon's doing, but any running back could be having a good season in Philadelphia. Saquon Barkley takes it to a level that we've rarely seen. And so plenty of running backs have done this stuff, even in this pass happy era of the NFL. But I think it matters a lot that you're seeing what it can mean to have this type of back on this type of team. And I wonder how teams try to replicate that. Because, I mean, Henry and Saquon and Josh Jacobs were free agents.
Right.
And in some cases, really affordable free agents. Like Derrick Henry cost Baltimore nothing. Yeah. But Detroit, you mentioned them. Jahmyr Gibbs, everybody got so mad at how highly he was drafted.
And now you're seeing.
Is that going to be the case moving forward? If it's a talent as special as Jahmyr Gibbs, I lean toward no.
Well, and you also have to kind of think of the logistical implications of all of this where, all right, there aren't a ton of Jahmyr Gibbs coming out of the draft right now. So like you will have to place a premium on them if this is a part of your offense going forward, which I think it will be. And we've seen this league over and over again be so cyclical, but each time something like a major concept comes back around, like in this case with more run first kind of or run heavy offenses, you see kind of a tweak though. And the tweak this time around that's different from maybe the 80s and the 90s, that what we were used to seeing when we were young, is you now are factoring in a mobile quarterback into all of this, like a running quarterback into all of this. So you look at Baltimore with Lamar Jackson adding a feature back. Like now, no longer are teams looking at mobile quarterbacks being like, oh, you can factor into the run game, so we don't need a feature back to add to you because we're kind of getting two players in one. No. Now teams are still featuring the run and featuring one of those backs and then giving defenses something that they are not built to contend with anymore. That's the big part. And that's the reason why this league is cyclical, is because you look at the ground and pound offenses that we grew up with. Well, the response to that was defenses got bigger and stronger and more stout up front. Well, how do you contend with that? Well, now you throw over top of them. And that's why we've seen this passing league come through. Now defenses have adjusted to that as well. And they are lighter. They are strong. They are faster. They are more complex as to kind of contend with the pass. Well, now you bring it back around with a running back and a mobile quarterback. So now you're stressing defenses in so many different ways that, again, they are not built to contend with anymore. That's what we're seeing now. And that's, I think, why we're seeing so much production on top of having something that's maybe theoretically more of a, running the ball is more of a strategy to kind of control a game and to take your time with things. And it doesn't necessarily lead, or what it hasn't in the past led to, all of these crazy scores. But then again, you look at the Ravens, you look at the Detroit Lions, who are dropping 50 on people, and Jared Goff is only throwing 25 passes. I mean, it's an incredible kind of evolution, and it brings out the nerd in me every time we have these kind of discussions and what the implications of them are. And then you are seeing, all right, if teams are going to feature this, colleges are going to have to start kind of running different schematics and stuff like that for these running backs, or there's going to be a premium placed on these guys. So you do see more running backs go in the top 10, in the top 20, because you just don't find them that much anymore in college.
That's what I'm interested to see. Because sitting here right now, I'm still dubious that we're going to see this crazy run on top 10 running backs. And you can even take it all the way back and say, for where they were as an organization, drafting Saquon Barkley second overall was still a mistake by the New York Giants, I think, because I don't think you can start with a running back. I think you've got to start in the trenches and make sure you've got a quarterback and all this other stuff.
Yeah,
but man, but that's, and to be blunt, I haven't quite figured it out, because I don't think you can start with a running back. But if you can drop Jahmyr Gibbs into an offense that already has everything else,
which is exactly what Detroit did.
100%. And you could argue the same thing with Philadelphia. Saquon is the icing on what was already a very good cake, but hot damn, is it the best icing ever?
Right. Now it's the best cake ever.
I'm curious how teams balance that of where do we find these guys?
You know what this all boils down to? You know what this all boils down to, right?
I need to know.
You need to invest in the offensive line first and foremost for literally everything.
No, for sure.
Any team that does not start with an offensive line, I don't want to hear it.
Find me a team that's in the midst of the running back renaissance, and I'll find you a good offensive line, with probably the exception of Baltimore. Not to say that it's not elite, but I feel
like they're a lot better. Like, I was scared about Baltimore given all of the losses they took over this, and they didn't really prioritize it in the way that I would have expected. Given the losses that they had this offseason, but they are doing a lot better than I think a lot of people realize.
They also have the greatest running quarterback of all time,
who can get himself out of a lot of
who
issues.
Stresses all defenses in a way that very few people can. So I can point to elements outside of the running back position that have made all of this possible. All of that said, it just emphasizes how important these guys can really be. And I call it good marketing, because they struck while the iron was in the exact right place. All of these guys, they signed with good teams. They signed with organizations that know how to run the football. They're reaping the benefits of it. Guys who come after them are going to reap the benefits of it. It's an exciting time for running game nerds, which clearly the two of us very much are.
I'm just a football nerd.
All right, let's wrap it up with your last one. What do you got?
I wanted to just bring this now down to kind of a micro level and just very quickly talk about someone who I feel like is much more under the radar, but that their team should be very, very thankful for. And I know their team is very, very thankful for. And that's Zach Allen. of the Denver Broncos, because nobody had the Denver
some
Broncos defense.
Love on the program.
Absolutely, because nobody had this defense. There were so many question marks coming into the season about this defense. Obviously, there were question marks about the offense. You take Bo Nix 12th overall. You've got Sean Payton, who has his guy. You let Russell Wilson walk with all of that money out the door. Was this going to be able to work? And this Denver Broncos defense, man, it's phenomenal. And the crazy part about all of this is Zach Allen matters so incredibly much. Classified as a 3-4 defensive tackle, so he still does kind of play when in those 3-down fronts and the base fronts. He's still playing on the edge technically, but he's classified as defensive interior. He's classified as a defensive tackle, and yet he has the most pass rush snaps of any player this season. He's got 56 total pressures through the first 11 weeks, which because he missed this last game. 56 total pressures, second only to Trey Hendrickson in Cincinnati for the first 11 weeks of the season. And
he's second only to one of the best edge rushers in the NFL.
In the NFL.
Cool.
From the interior,
Casual.
from an interior role. And it's resulted in a Denver defense that is 8th in pass rush EPA per play allowed, 6th in overall EPA per play allowed. Oh, wait, no, I'm sorry. That was last week. Do you want to know what they are before that when they do have Zach Allen? Because it varies very greatly. So last week, they were 8th in pass rush EPA per play allowed. Weeks 1 through 11, when Zach Allen is part of this, 5th in pass rush EPA. Like, they go up 3 whole spots with one player added into this. And of course, there are other variables and all that other stuff, but they are 2nd in overall EPA per play allowed for the majority of this season. And a lot of it just has to do with Zach Allen, with that front. Then you can also rely on a guy like Pat Surtain in the defensive backfield. And just like that whole, what Vance Joseph has been able to do here in Denver with, again, so many initial question marks. I can't say enough about it. And I want to give more love to Zach Allen in particular, because I am thankful for him, and I'm sure Denver Broncos fans are too.
We were joking on Sunday while we were putting the show together that, okay, obviously Patrick Surtain, Bo Nix, very obviously, Cortland Sutton. Outside of that, I don't know, like the average casual NFL fan, I don't know how many of them could name very many more Denver Broncos after that trio. Well, Zach Allen is one to know.
42 total tackles, 5 sacks, 12 tackles for loss, 21 quarterback hits.
Name an elite defensive tackle, and he's producing, at least statistically, better than that guy. I mean, he's more pressures than Chris Jones, than Matabuke, than Quinnen Williams, Cameron Hayward, even our guy Dexter Lawrence. He's got more pressures than him. 7 sacks, by the way. It doesn't lead the league, but for an interior lineman, I feel like Aaron Donald has kind of ruined that. Like, we don't, seven sacks doesn't seem good enough when you've seen what Aaron Donald's capable of, but I promise you,
any
7 sacks as an interior defensive lineman is rare air.
From a D tackle. I mean, that's not, although again, that's one of the other maybe football evolutionary things, another conversation for another time about how much more athletic a lot of these interior defensive linemen are getting and how much pressure they're able to get, and how that's key to so much of what defenses want to do, in this day and age. But that's another conversation for another time. Right now, Zach Allen, kudos to you. Get an extra turkey leg.
I'll keep mine short and sweet. And I hesitate to even say this guy flies under the radar. I think NFL fans are well aware of who he is and what he does, but I'm thankful for you, Brian Branch.
I would have absolutely talked about Brian Branch if I thought he was under the radar, but maybe I just talk about him a lot.
He's not under the radar. He's a really good player. When I think about like what I love about football and football players,
I know
Brian Branch damn near embodies it.
Yes.
And in an era where defense is harder than it's ever been, I think Brian Branch is one of the tone setters for a Detroit team. We talk about it all the time. The kneecap biters.
Yes.
To use the
guy that's going to flip the bird to the division rival's bench before he gets ejected off the field.
To use a term that I picked up in a football facility, I still don't really know what it means. Brian Branch has some shit in his neck. As do
I've heard that too.
The entire Detroit Lions roster. And it's the attitude that he plays with. And it's not just him. There's a bunch of guys like that on the Lions, but he just embodies what you want in a defender, in a safety. I know, like, people call him dirty. I think that's nonsense.
No.
I think the play that got him ejected in Green Bay was a bang play.
Yep.
I know he got a lot of flack for a hit he put on Michael Freeman on Sunday that I thought was, if it wasn't a clean hit, it was at least a hit with good intentions. It looked like he tried to put his shoulder on the guy. To me, he is just a feisty, physical SOB. 61 tackles, 13 pass breakups, which matches his rookie total already, by the way.
Yeah.
4 interceptions. In a given week, he moves from the box to free to the slot. They could ask him to play wide if they really needed him to. Not that they want him to, but the dude just does everything. I loved him at Alabama. I didn't understand why he fell into the mid 40s in the draft.
Getting him in the second round was such a steal for Brad Holmes.
He is not going to win Defensive Player of the Year, but he should be in the consideration for it. And you know what I thought of? I was rewatching him before we did this.
Yeah.
He doesn't like, he is not the same. Like, it's not the same profile. He's like 3 or 4 inches shorter. I'm not saying they're the same player. He just reminds me of one of my all-time favorite football players, and that would be Cam Chancellor. He's going to get there, and he's got bad intentions when he does. And he is going to hold everybody to a standard of physicality and feistiness and doing the damn job. I could go on and on.
In the interest of, though, talking a little bit more about things that are under the radar, Brian Branch deserves all of these. You know who else deserves all of this? Kirby Joseph.
Sure.
That tandem,
one of the
in
best
Detroit's
safety
backfield,
tandems in the NFL.
The best safety tandem in the NFL. I will not hear otherwise. They are 2 of the top graded safeties in the league according to PFF, coverage grades, overall grades. They just both have some shit in their necks. And they want to hit people. Not only do they want the finesse, really fun.
It's a whole thing.
That's the whole thing about these guys, though, is like, not only do they want the finessey kind of, I want an interception here, or, I'm going to get a break up on this guy yet. These guys want to hit people. They want to come down in the box and they want to smack someone in the face. And they do it. And Aaron Glenn allows them to do it. Aaron Glenn knows how to utilize safeties so incredibly well. And it's the reason that Detroit's defense was able to withstand an injury like Aiden Hutchinson's, which is up front, which your entire defense revolves around. You lose that player, but you don't lose a step. And a lot of that has to do with the back level in Brian Branch and Kirby Joseph.
In a league where we're constantly complaining that physicality and defense is being removed by the rules and the style of play.
They're bringing it back, and
be more like the Detroit Lions and like Brian Branch and Kirby Joseph. I am thankful for y'all. I love watching y'all do your thing. Okay, I think that just about. I mean, I could go on and on because I could.
These are fun conversations.
I could pick 18 more players to just gush about if we had the time. Unfortunately, we do not. Carmen, I hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Thank you as always for hopping on. We'll chat with you soon.
Happy Turkey Day.
Thanks again to Carmen Vitale for hopping on. And now, as promised, my weekly conversation with NFL on Fox insider Jay Glazer talked about Daniel Jones, what his landing spot might look like, the ongoing drama with the New York Jets. Also checked in on Brock Purdy, Austin Ekeler, a couple big injury situations to monitor as we head into week 13, some other storylines as well. Check it out.
All right, Jay, the football teams themselves aren't very good, but I can always count on the 2 clubs in New York to provide me with, A, world-class entertainment, and B, just always something to ask you about. I'm
call that entertainment on Sunday?
It's entertaining. No, not the football. Everything else, okay. Not the football. I do want to start there with the team that played on Sunday. The New York Giants got blown off the field by the Tampa Bay Bucks, and we're already seeing Brian Daboll responding to this. You know, Dexter Lawrence, Malik Neighbors after the game calling the Giants soft. Daboll's in the media on Monday talking about how he's trying to keep it in house, but it feels like the vibes are deteriorating around this team, man. I mean, what's the latest, and how should we feel about the last few games of this season for them?
And it's an issue when it's not kept in-house. Everybody talks about making an in-season coaching change. You don't do that unless it's becoming a distraction. And these guys, obviously, I think Daboll needs to keep it from deteriorating even more. And look, at this point also, I talked to one of the executives there yesterday. I said, you got to make sure, if they're not going to listen to your coach or you guys, you got to make sure your leaders, they go down and make sure everybody else listens to the leaders and take some pride in each other, because right about this point is when guys make business decisions as far as, I'm not going to end up doing anything to hurt myself the rest of the year here. I'm going to be somewhere else next year, or there's going to be somebody else here next year. It's just not acceptable. It's really, at this point, it's about a pride thing. And that's one of the biggest challenges when you have a situation like this, but it's certainly, not trending in the right directions.
That's why, John Mara came out a while ago at this point and gave Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen a vote of confidence, and that's nice. But this is
don't ever take stock of that, because things change. It's an
exactly.
Game. Usually, it's a kiss of death, but it's an emotional, it's an emotional game, and emotions get very high and change dramatically week by week when you see a game like this. And at this point, you're saying, okay, it's all Tommy DeVito. It wasn't. It was actually the defense. Defense was atrocious, and the defense was their stronger point this season, last season, the year before that, and that's going downhill as well.
It's not the only team where the vibes are bad. Obviously, the Jets didn't have to get blown out on Sunday, but
I will say this one more thing. Again, I started my career covering the Giants, 93 on. I know that organization as well as anybody else. And the Giants, one of the things they have there is they have this sky is falling thing, that every time something bad happens, it's, oh my God, here we go again. Sky is falling. And that's what needs to be stopped. And it's a culture thing. I've talked about culture in the past. That whole thing of, oh, here it goes again. Sky is falling once again. That's got to change. I like the fact that they kind of went outside the organization in a way which they normally was just done the same thing. And to go get a guy like Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll, who weren't part of that same normal trio, though Daboll was part of the Belichick in that coaching realm somewhat. They've got to somehow get someone to come in and change the culture where it's not sky is falling, or get Joe and Brian to be able to change it where sky isn't always falling.
Well, that's an interesting larger conversation too, because look, I get it. It's been rough, and I wouldn't blame John Mara if he's having second thoughts about the way this is going. But also, the Giants are developing this reputation as a team that fires everybody and starts over again like every 2 years, and I wonder if you kind of have to fight against that inclination. Yeah, exactly.
Here's the other thing too. I remember Ernie, of course, the great Giant GM, told me one time, we're not fighting against the Jets here in this town. The Jets aren't fighting against us. We're both fighting against the Yankees.
Yeah.
Totally different, right? They have this certain standard there. We're upheld to that standard.
Well, speaking of the Jets, even without a game over the weekend, they're always going to find a way to be in the news, usually for not great reasons. Let's talk about your report, which was straight out of a movie. And I think it just sort of illustrates what you're fighting against, trying to get the New York Jets into relevancy.
Well, look, yesterday on Fox NFL Sunday, I put out that on Tuesday, and this is just right, the hijinks that goes on there with Woody Johnson and his team. Is Tuesday, it's their last practice before the bye, and Woody Johnson flies his helicopter in, lands it there. All the players kind of looked around like, well, this can't be good. And Joe Douglas turned to Jeff Ulbrich, and there were several other coaches there. And, I heard this from several people said, well, if this is, if I get pulled off the practice field here, it's been an honor serving with you. And they laughed about it, and he was pulled off the practice field, and he was gone before those guys got off of practice. And that was it, gone. And, look, that I said that the great divide between, the players and the staff and everybody between Woody just keeps getting greater and greater and greater. It does. So what they've done now is they've actually hired the 33rd team, which is Mike Tannenbaum, who used to be their GM. I don't want to say hired, but they've contracted them. Him and Rick Spielman, used to be a general manager of the Vikings, who helped Washington last year as well, to go to them saying, hey, can you help us find our next general manager and head coach? So they're going to a guy that they've already gotten rid of to say, can you help us find the next guy? Because we haven't found anybody good since we got rid of you. What are we talking about here? And look, I'm glad they did, because Mike and Rick know what they're talking about. So I'm glad they did go to those guys, but it's just, you can't make it up. But it's going to be hard, because Aaron Rodgers ain't going to be there next year. There's going to be, they see what what he's done. They know that they haven't been in the playoffs for 14 years. They know the reason why. And, listen, I really learned this from Sean Payton when he went down to New Orleans. You got to go in and teach an owner how to be an owner. And a lot of these owners don't want to hear it because they've made money elsewhere. They've inherited money elsewhere. They always have this, and they don't get it. Like, hey, this is a different business than anything else. Anything else. It's a different culture, different business. They don't want to hear it. Mr. Benson was great. He listened to Sean. Sean and them taught, hey, and that organization is beyond first class now. Mickey Loomis does an amazing job over there, and it's just changed over time of, hey, we have a certain standard here that we're going to live up to, and a certain culture that's a winning culture now. Even in losing years, they still do things first class, and that's the difference.
Real quickly, and with I'm just curious because of everything we're talking about with how weird the ownership is and how much of an effect it has. You feel pretty confident that this is it for Aaron Rodgers? Even, I mean, maybe New York, yeah.
Oh yeah, there. I would think so. Yeah, I mean, depends what the next regime is, but I can't see Aaron also saying, "Yeah, let me stick around with Woody." He's seen it. He's seen it firsthand. What a carnival it is over there. It's a circus.
It has been for the better part, 14 years, but specifically here over these last two, it's been impressive.
But also the problem is the owner tries to play fantasy football a lot of times.
Yeah.
And
no, that much is obvious based on
like them signing Dalvin Cook last year. That was the owner. And Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas didn't want it because they said our running back room is great. We don't need to mess up our running back room. Nothing against Dalvin Cook. We don't need to do it. And that was Woody Johnson. Woody Johnson's trying to make draft picks, and they've had to push back at him. No, we're going to do this. It's just, man, you can't. But here's the thing, and here's where some owners don't get it. Woody's one of them. These guys put in so much work to evaluate personnel. You can't just read the newspaper and come in and think you can make calls because culture is involved. You can't just put fantasy football pieces involved because it affects culture. And as I've said, culture is everything.
Daniel Jones escaped the circus in New York last week. I wanted to ask you about
this. He wanted to stay. And
I'm sure he did.
He actually did. He's a good dude. He wanted to stay only because I think he just doesn't know any better. You know what I mean? It's he doesn't realize
the only team he's ever been a part of.
Yeah. So he has relationships over there and things like that. So he was trying to even redo his contract to stay. And, obviously they were, okay, we're done. But Daniel Jones says he had 10 teams that reached out like immediately. Bam.
That's what I wanted to ask you about.
They're vying for him. They are like trying to get Daniel Jones over there. Absolutely. Because, a lot of people look at it. It's like Sam Darnold, or even like Baker Mayfield until he got to Sean McVay. Same thing, right? Sometimes you get with the right guy and it resurrects your career. And I think that's what people are trying to convince Daniel Jones they could do for him, even a short period over here. Because I don't for this year.
I don't suppose you have a hint about the team that was curious about him being able to start right away, like you.
Yeah, the Raiders are like a team that I know.
If they weren't already interested, they have to be right now with Gardner Minshew having a broken collarbone. I'm curious to see how that goes for Daniel Jones. I know obviously it didn't go well by any stretch in New York, but I mean, you just said, every year we've got one of these reclamation projects at quarterback. I think Daniel Jones is talented enough that the right coach and the right team could do wonders for the rest of his career.
I think he needs, he's so beat up. If he goes and plays somewhere right now, probably not great. He's so beat up. Go learn from one of these quarterback studs. Kevin O'Connell, Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay, somebody like that. Go learn from one of these guys. And let yourself kind of get built up in that way. Again, we've seen him with Sam Darnold. We've seen him with Baker Mayfield. Could do wonders for you because you just go exhale somewhere and go learn from somebody who is one of these quarterback gurus and knows how to build you from the inside out.
One story that we did not realize was going to be a story until late last week was Brock Purdy's shoulder injury. You reported on it on Sunday, locked up on him late in the week. They had a separate MRI for him, and obviously he couldn't go against Green Bay. That's really troubling knowing that they've got a road trip to Buffalo coming up this week. I mean, do you have any insight or new news about what to expect from the Purdy situation?
Just got to see if it loosens up. That's it. Like it grabbed on Thursday and he's like, oh man, can't do it, which they weren't expecting. So, once it grabbed, again, they gave him the other MRI because they just said, okay, the first MRI, man, it didn't show like an awful lot of damage. There's damage, But they expected, okay, with a couple days of rest and rehab, it'll be good. And then when it didn't, and it grabbed, they said, well, let's go in again. Let's just make sure we didn't miss anything. Because listen, I will tell you this. I did an MRI on this shoulder right here. I was training Alden Smith and Luke Wilson during COVID. And this shoulder was hurting a lot. And all it showed the MRI was a bone spur and a rotator cuff tear that just needed to be cleaned up arthroscopically. So I went in and they weren't even putting me to sleep. They said, we're going to give you a nerve blocker. And I'm like, how long is it going to be? Doc said about 45 minutes. I said, no, man, I got ADHD, man. I can't sit there for 45 minutes without my phone. You got to put me out. And thank God I did. It was 3.5 hours. I woke up, that breathing tube down, all this. It turned out the MRI missed it all. I had a torn labrum that flapped over and got stuck in the joint. I had 2 bone spurs, one coming off the collarbone that I cut off, which is real painful, and 2 rotator cuff tears. They had a major surgery on my shoulder that I had no idea about. And that's the problem with the shoulder. A lot of these MRIs are really, really inconclusive. So that's why they go. It's not like they're not hiding anything. It's just that with the shoulder, there's so many things in the shoulder. A lot of the times they're inconclusive because inflammation will hide some things. Again, mine was like completely, not even close. And we're talking a torn labrum, and it didn't show a torn labrum. Could you imagine if all I did was the nerve blocker, and all of a sudden they're like, uh-oh, we got a torn labrum. And by the way, I was asleep. No. And it was 2 days before the season, before my first show for Fox, and the doctor just had to make a decision knowing my lifestyle and just cut the labrum out, which just means I can't throw a ball anymore. So it's lucky I don't play quarterback and pitch and can't do military press.
Hopefully that is not the situation for Brock Purdy and he can get back quickly.
Yeah,
always learning something new from you.
It sucked.
Yeah, I bet it did, man. Goodness.
Freaking Alden Smith. Thanks, man.
One other injury issue I wanted to talk to you about. Austin Ekeler took a nasty hit, unfortunately, at the end of that Dallas-Washington game. Dan Quinn already said it's a concussion afterward, or that's what he's being evaluated for. But do you have any insight on the severity here for Austin Ekeler?
Yeah, it is severe. I talked to Dan last night about it too, and he said, man, we're going to make sure he's good. I think it's the second one this year. That one was a scary one that they hospitalized him as precaution. So he's going to be out for quite some time. And then also Brian Robinson injured his ankle. So they had an MRI of that. So they're not sure what's going to happen at the running back position right now in the immediately near future.
Everybody needs their bye week, but my God, do the Commanders need to get to their bye week here?
When is their bye?
It's not for another week. It's not for another week. They've got one more game this week, and then they finally get their bye in week 14.
Wow.
It's crazy. We'll see how they handle that. I feel for them. They look like a team that needs a week off.
Yeah, I know. I agree. You could see they're gassing. Yeah.
Jay, one last thing. It's Thanksgiving week, man. I hope the holiday is great for you. I'm curious. Y'all obviously still have a show to do. What's your favorite Fox Thanksgiving memory? What's your favorite thing about this Thursday?
Last year by far. A couple things. Number one, we went to New York City, did a 2-hour show. I took my now wife, Rosie, and me, Jimmy Johnson, Kurt Menefee, got to light up the Empire State Building.
I remember that. Yeah, we talked about that.
And I'm a New Yorker, for me, it was like, oh my God. And then they took us to the top by the spire up there. It was incredible. But probably the most special thing is I got to spend it with my goddaughter, Isabella Strahan's daughter, who that time we just found out was battling brain cancer. And I remember raising a toast to her saying, hey, we got a lot of people in this room with us who've done some amazing things. We have Hall of Famers and Oscars and television Hall of Fame, this and that. But by this time next year, Isabella, you have done the most incredible thing anybody in this room. And she followed through on that. She's the most incredible human being that any of us have been around this year. It really incredible. So
hell yeah, dude.
That was the coolest moment of us being together as a family for her and for Stray and his family that last year. Just at Michael's house. It's beautiful.
That's awesome to hear, and it's something to be thankful for. It's not hard.
But that's our show too, man. Like people always say, like, are you guys really like this? Man, we spend holidays together. We spend the off seasons together. We go vacation together. We take trips around the world together. Like we are family. It's the best friend. Last night, Jimmy Johnson and I just sitting there watching the game, and he's like, my favorite team. Like it's just of all these teams, and that's how I feel. Like when I'm not with these guys in the off season, I struggle between the years. Bad. It's like the main team I need to get me good over here between the years. So yeah, these holidays I've gotten to spend. This is my 21st year, so it's my 21st Thanksgiving with my Fox family. and no better family to have.
It shines through, man, and I can't wait to watch y'all on Thursday. I hope you have a really happy Thanksgiving, and I'll talk to you next week.
You too, man. God bless everybody.
As always, let's wrap this show up with our power rankings, taking a look around the league, see where things stand as we move out of week 12 and into week 13. Holiday season finally upon us. Let's get to it. If I can see my handy dandy graphic, there it is. As I've been saying, I mean, you can see it right there. I mean, the bottom third, bottom fourth, it all starts to look the same when teams are stacking up losses. You know, Gardner Minshew getting injured is a huge blow to the Raiders, I think. But I'm going to start a little bit higher up. I'm going to make sure we've mentioned him a little bit. I'm just going to continue giving the Carolina Panthers their moments in the sun. Moving up one spot to number 23, Bryce Young, looking like a number 1 overall pick. And no, that is not an exaggeration. Yes, they lost to the Chiefs. I give them the moral victory here. I just thought the guy played out of his mind. He was throwing with confidence, throwing with anticipation, layered throws, leading receivers into open space, fitting passes into tight windows. It's enough to make me wonder if the Panthers need to find a quarterback in 2025. There's still plenty of games left. Things can change, but the way he's been playing since returning from getting benched, highlighted by this performance against the Chiefs, if he can play at or around this level for 6 more weeks, if I'm Dave Canales and the Carolina Panthers, I'm not looking for a quarterback. I'm not going to try to improve in the draft, especially a quarterback draft that most people agree is not as good as it's been the last couple years. I'm moving forward with Bryce Young. He really has been that impressive. It's a really cool story for him. I like to see it. Let's just keep the theme going. Let's talk some words of encouragement to these young quarterbacks, because I'm moving the Chicago Bears up 2 spots. Back-to-back losses to division rivals, sure. I don't think the Chicago Bears are going to the NFL playoffs. I think I looked at their probability, and it's in the cellar, as you might guess, considering how good the NFC North is this year. If you're trying to talk yourself into a Bears playoff run, I don't see it, but that's not the point. Since the Bears fired Shane Waldron and reassessed and revamped their offense with Thomas Brown, Caleb Williams looks like the guy. He was incredible in that loss to the Vikings, and I don't think we talked about it as much as we probably should have on the recap show. 340 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, once again used his legs to pick up tough yards and improvise, made at least 4 insane throws, just big league, number 1 overall pick type throws. Bears fans, as much as it might suck to lose on the last play of the game to your division rivals 2 weeks in a row, this is a guy that can lead you where you're so desperate to go. They just got to surround him with the right pieces, the right coaching, make a better offensive coordinator hire next time. Maybe, depending on how the rest of this goes, make an inspired head coaching hire. Chicago, I believe in you. You have a quarterback that is capable of taking you to great things. You just got to make some better decisions to surround him with the right people, because man, is he fun. All right, jumping up to number 11, up 2 spots, the Denver Broncos continue their steady climb. Not a win worth writing home about against the Las Vegas Raiders, but beat the Raiders on the road for a first time in a decade. That matters. I'm a firm believer the mark of a good team is just winning games you're supposed to, preferably with as little drama as possible. And the Raiders made it interesting for 2.5 quarters, but you win by 10 on the road against the division rival. You feel good about that. Broncos' next 3 are all winnable. And then you double dip with the Bengals and the Chiefs at the end of the year. You worry about that later. If you handle business, which is what they've been doing, this could be a double-digit win season for the Denver Broncos. I definitely did not have that on my bingo card. Moving up, I put the Ravens 1 spot above the Vikings at 5, Minnesota at 6. I think you could make the case either way. I'd be curious for your thoughts. The Vikings have the better overall resume. They started so hot. They beat San Francisco. They beat Houston. Their only loss at the buzzer to the Detroit Lions. Then they followed that up with a road Thursday night loss to a feisty Rams team. 9-2, incredibly consistent, just steady on both sides of the ball. They remind me of a Camry, just a smart, sensible car that's going to get you where you want to go. Meanwhile, The Baltimore Ravens don't have as good of a resume. I don't think they have wins as good as the Minnesota Vikings, other than, I guess, that crushing of the Bills. But that goes in there with puzzling losses to the Raiders and the Browns and only scoring 16 points against the Steelers. It's very up and down, but they're like that inconsistent sports car, man. Like all of the, every time you got to take it in for repairs, it's worth it when you can drive 150 miles an hour and just watch Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson do their thing. They might have the highest ceiling in the entire NFL when everything's clicking. It's just, is it going to be clicking? I don't know. I don't know the right answer. I guess I'm just enamored with the playmaking potential of Lamar and Derrick Henry, but you could easily make a case that the Vikings have been the more consistently solid team. In the 3 spot, I've got the Philadelphia Eagles moving up 1 place above the Kansas City Chiefs. And I've been thinking about this for a few weeks, to be honest with you. I think Philly has been that impressive. The defensive improvements combined with all that talent on offense, the running game really getting going with Saquon Barkley. I was hesitant to do it when the Chiefs were undefeated, obviously, but Chiefs lose a game to Buffalo. They follow that up with a shaky performance against, Carolina's improving and we're all happy for Bryce Young. That is still a talent poor roster that the Kansas City Chiefs should be able to handle. It's just every week is stressful. It's not to say that they can't three-peat. They are 10-1. They're doing just fine. I'm not writing the Chiefs off. They were my Super Bowl pick before the season. But Philadelphia, you could make the case is playing as well as anybody in the NFL. I would not bet against them against Detroit, against Baltimore, against Buffalo, against Kansas City. I'm that impressed with how their defense has improved, and the collection of talent on offense is as good as there is in the NFL. I've got the Eagles in the 3 spot. I'm begging the football gods to give us an Eagles-Lions matchup at some stage of the postseason. I think it would be absolutely fantastic. Top 2 remaining the same. Bills, Lions on top, but keep an eye on the Eagles, man. That's all I'm going to say. That does it for the power rankings. That does it for the show. We will be back to preview week 13, which is Thanksgiving, by the way. 3 big matchups on Thursday. Cowboys, Giants right here on Fox in the middle window. You got Bears, Lions early. You got Packers, Dolphins late. That's going to be a good one. We'll dive into all of that action on Thursday. There's a Black Friday game. Plenty of good matchups on Sunday as well. Just because it's the holidays does not mean the grind stops. We will have a full preview for you, so make sure you're subscribed. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your pods, it'll be waiting for you. I think we're going to put that up Wednesday night so you can have it for your Turkey Day preparations for your football holiday. Looking forward to it. I hope you all have a wonderful week, wonderful travel. Like I said, if you're moving around the country, I hope that's going well for you. And we will talk to you later this week as we dive into all things week 13. As always, I appreciate it so much.